They haven't said it in years. Not out loud. Not in a way you recognized. Not with words that arrived in the correct order and carried the weight you were expecting. The last time you remember hearing it clearly, they were younger and the world was simpler, and love between you felt like something that could be announced without requiring courage. Now there is distance, or what feels like distance. A quietness in the space between you that you have been interpreting as absence, as withdrawal, as evidence that something important has been lost. You watch them and you miss them, even when they are sitting 3 feet away. You cannot name what has changed, only that something has. Here is what nobody tells you. They have not stopped. The love did not go somewhere. It changed languages. And the language it changed into is one that no generation before Gen Z has spoken quite this way, which means you were never taught to hear it, which means it has been arriving every day, in forms you have been walking past without knowing what you were walking past. This is not a small thing. What you are about to understand may change the way you look at the last several years of your relationship with them. First, you need to understand why the language changed in the first place. Research in attachment theory, particularly the work of Dr. Sue Johnson on emotionally focused therapy, establishes that the verbal expression of love, the direct quote, _0, delivered without protective irony or deflection, requires what she calls emotional accessibility and responsiveness in the relationship. It requires that the person saying it has a reasonable confidence built on previous experience that what they are sending will be received, understood, and not used against them. For a generation that grew up watching authenticity, performed, weaponized, and commodified on every digital platform they inhabited, verbal declarations of love carry an enormous weight of vulnerability. They require the removal of every protective layer simultaneously, and a nervous system that has been trained to expect that raw exposure will be met with indifference or awkwardness, or a response that doesn't match the size of what was offered, learns to find other ways, not less loving ways, different ways, indirect ways, ways that carry the same content with less surface area exposed to potential pain. Here is what the language actually sounds like. The first way, the thing they sent you at midnight. A meme, a TikTok, a tweet screenshot. Something absurd, something niche, something that has no obvious emotional content until you understand what is actually being communicated by the act of sending it. Here is what most people don't realize. That 7-second video is one of the most neurologically sophisticated acts of love available to a generation that grew up speaking digital. Neuroscience research on oxytocin, the neurochemical at the center of social bonding and emotional attunement, confirms that the hormone is released not by grand declarations, but by the felt experience of being accurately seen, of someone demonstrating that they know your inner world well enough to know exactly what will land there. When they send you that meme, the message encoded inside it is not the meme. The message is, I was alone with something funny or painful or strange, and the first person I thought of was you. I know your sense of humor precisely enough to know this will reach you. I know your current emotional state well enough to know this is what you need right now. I am crossing the space between us to say, you are in my mind, you matter to me, I see you. That is not casual, that is attunement. That is exactly what oxytocin was evolved to deliver, expressed through the native medium of a generation you did not grow up in. When you respond with just a thumbs up, or scroll past it, or say quote one without registering the depth of what arrived, you are not being rude, you are being unaware, and they feel the gap between what they sent and what came back, and the next time, the threshold for sending something real is slightly higher than it was before. The second way, the small thing from their day. They come home and say something small, not a production, not an announcement, just a small observation about what happened during the day. A strange interaction at work, a detail from something they saw. a minor frustration or a minor win that has no particular importance on its own. Science has now confirmed what relationship researchers have long documented. The act of sharing a small, low-stakes piece of one's daily experience is one of the primary behaviors of secure attachment. It is what researchers call bids for connection, a term developed by Dr. John Gottman to describe the small, often indirect attempts to establish emotional contact that partners and family members make dozens of times per day. The small story from their day is a bid. It is them bringing a piece of their interior life and placing it in the space between you. Not because the story is important, because you are the person they chose to tell it to. Out of everyone who exists in their life, out of the friends and the group chats and the online spaces where they spend significant portions of their social energy, they came to you with this small piece of their day. Every time that bid is met with distraction, with a redirected conversation about something more important, with a half-present response while your eyes are somewhere else, the frequency of bids decreases. They are measuring, through each response, whether the exchange rate is worth the investment. When it consistently isn't, the small stories stop coming. And you wonder later why they never tell you anything. Meet the small bid fully. Put down the phone. Turn toward them. Ask one more question about the story that has no practical importance. What you are actually doing is telling them, you are worth my full attention, even when what you are bringing is small, especially when what you are bringing is small. The third way. The question that wasn't really a question. They ask for your opinion on something that matters to them, not because they don't have an opinion already, not because they need your expertise, but because asking for your perspective on something important to them is one of the few remaining forms of vulnerability they allow themselves with you. Developmental psychologist Diana Baumrins. Research on adolescent and young adult relationships with parents identifies this behavior as a trust invitation. When a young person brings a significant decision, a creative project, a relationship question, or a life dilemma to an adult and asks what they think, they are not primarily seeking information. They are seeking a particular kind of relational experience, the experience of being taken seriously, of having their concern treated as worthy of genuine engagement, of not being dismissed or redirected or answered too quickly with a conclusion that skips over the weight of what was actually being offered. When you answer the question directly without first acknowledging the weight of what they're navigating, they hear, "I received the surface of what you asked and processed it efficiently." When you pause first, when you reflect the significance back before you offer your perspective, they hear, "I received all of it, including the part you didn't say out loud." The question is the love. The answer is just the packaging. The fourth way. The same room, no words. They come and sit in the room where you are. They don't initiate conversation. They don't appear to need anything. They bring their phone or their laptop and they simply exist in your presence for an hour while you do whatever you are doing. This is called parallel presence, and in the taxonomy of Gen Z attachment behavior, it sits near the top of the intimacy hierarchy. Research in proximity-seeking behavior, rooted in attachment theory, establishes that the desire to be near a person without requiring anything active from that proximity is one of the clearest indicators of secure attachment. Infants seek it. Adults in deeply secure relationships seek it. And Gen Z, who are simultaneously the most digitally connected and the most interpersonally isolated generation in modern history, seek it with the people who represent safety in their nervous system's map of the world. When they come and sit in your room in silence, they are telling you that you are on that map. That being in your proximity, even without interaction, reduces the baseline ambient anxiety of their day. That you are, in the precise neurological sense of the word, a safe haven. Do not fill the silence with questions. Do not turn it into an opportunity for a conversation you have been meaning to have. Receive it for what it is. The act of being chosen as the room someone wants to be in is not a small thing. It is in the emotional vocabulary of a generation that struggles to say the simple version, a very large thing. The fifth way, the anger that comes back. They get angry with you, not the cold withdrawal, but the actual emotional heat of frustration or conflict. They push back, they argue, they say something that stings. Here is what most people don't realize. They only fight with the people they believe, on some level, will not leave because of it. Attachment research, particularly the work of Mary Main on adult attachment patterns, distinguishes between secure and insecure relational behaviors in conflict. In insecure attachment, conflict is avoided at all costs because the underlying belief is that expressing negative emotion will result in the loss of the relationship. In secure attachment, conflict can be risked because the underlying belief is that the relationship is robust enough to survive a difficult moment. When your Gen Z person gets angry with you and brings that anger into the space between you rather than suppressing it and going dark, they are demonstrating a form of relational trust that is more intimate than any declaration of affection. They are betting that you are safe enough to be angry with, that you will not disappear, that the relationship will hold. The worst response to this is one that confirms their risk was miscalculated. That pulls away, escalates, or makes the anger itself the crime, rather than the content of the anger the subject of genuine engagement. The anger is love with nowhere clean to go yet. Your job is to make it cleaner. Not to eliminate the difficulty of the moment, but to demonstrate that the relationship is large enough to hold it. The sixth way, making sure you ate. They ask if you've eaten. They bring you something without being asked. They text to check if you got home, okay? They send a link about something you mentioned being worried about 3 weeks ago. They remember the appointment you said was stressful and ask how it went. This is the most quietly devastating form of love that Gen Z expresses, and the one most consistently overlooked. The transfer of the caretaking instinct, the moment at which a young person's attachment energy shifts from receiving care to offering it, is one of the primary markers of secure relational development. It means they have internalized enough stability from the relationship to have resources available to give back. They learned what being cared for feels like. They learned it from you. And now they are doing it back in the small gestures, in the quiet check-ins, in the way they notice things about your life that you didn't realize they were paying attention to. When they ask if you've eaten, they are not asking about the food. They are saying, your well-being is inside my awareness. I hold you there even when we are not in the same room. You have been loved this whole time. In 6 languages you were never taught to speak. In the midnight meme and the small story from the day, and the question that wasn't really a question, and the silent hour in your room, and the anger that trusted you enough to show up, and the question about whether you ate. It has been arriving every day. Through every screen and every silence and every bid that found you distracted and tried again tomorrow. The only question that remains is whether you will learn to receive it in the language it was sent. Because they are not going to learn to speak yours until they have experienced enough times that speaking their own is worth the risk. Start there, in the next message they send you at midnight. Before you decide, it